afternoon and welcome to Elmwood Speaks. This is our 7th year. The Centralia Cultural Society puts this on along with the City of Centralia, Elmwood Commission, and other committees. Bring this to you. It involves about 50 people. Elmwood was a burial ground in the late 1850s. As you can see, it was called a cemetery in 1860. This is when the area was just beginning to be settled. And the city voted to call it Elmwood Cemetery in 1913. That's a common name for cemeteries in this part of the country. There are 63 acres at Elmwood, and we have over 18,000 recorded burials out there. And yes, there is plenty of space left. This is not an advertisement, but if you call City Hall, you can buy real estate. This is an antique postcard of what would now be the Pittenger Memorial. In it was a fountain and beautiful metal fountain. You can see some of those original large monuments in the background. This is an artist's replica or version idea of what it might have looked like if you were here, standing here on the day that they laid the tracks through what is now Centralia, through the downtown area. Illinois Central named this Centralia after themselves because they were granted the land by the United States government. This is a map I found at the History Museum. And notice the little trains there with the smoke coming out, and you see the way the city was laid out in grid fashion. Centralia was being advertised as an opportunity, a place to move where the land was fertile and there were business opportunities available. So, as we get into Elmwood, to the Gregg Street on the right, and this is what I would refer to as the Civil War era cemetery. The tall monument was donated by the citizens of Centralia to honor the soldiers from Centralia who fought. It seems, when I look at the research, that every male between the ages of 15 and 50 went to join the Union Army. This was a very strong Union cause. Those V-shaped stones are government issued. These were soldiers who may have passed after being wounded in battle, and then they were brought up here to Centralia for the local hospital. This blank area you see is not really empty. It is commonly called Potter's Field. It's not for indigent burials, though. It was developed during the 1914 epidemics of influenza, scarlet fever. People were dying so quickly, and because of contagion, they had to be buried that day. And so they had to get them in the ground quickly. There are hundreds of people laid to rest there. This is the flag circle, which was put in fairly recently. It is near the Annie statue, and there she is. Annie is the most famous of the Centralia statues, or monuments, I guess. She's nationally known. She was the much-loved daughter of Dr. Marshall, who was a doctor during the Civil War at the hospital where some of those soldiers would have been treated. When she was 11, she contracted diphtheria and passed away. Her family honored her with this statue, which was made from a portrait that had been painted of her. The original strings on that violin were said to have been horsehair, and so on a windy evening they might have vibrated, and that's the origin of some of the legends that she plays the violin tonight. Across from Annie is the memorial, they call it the chapel, of the daughters of the Civil War veterans. As their fathers were getting older, they were starting to pass on. They decided they wanted a memorial. This chapel was built, dedicated by their efforts in 1914. The basement was used to store coffins at times when the weather was too cold to dig graves. The upstairs could be used for funerals in inclement weather. It is now not open to the public. This is the Pittenger Monument right outside. George Pittenger was an extremely influential and civic-minded early settler and politically connected, powerful citizen. And so he is so honored. This stone was added to show you that during Victorian times, special shapes meant different things. A tree trunk shaped stone was the symbol of a life cut short. There are a number of mausoleums for some families, some prosperous families, but they chose to be together above ground. And then we have this exceptional area where there are monuments. The one on the corner probably would run about $1 million today. It shows us that at one time there was a great amount of prosperity in this area, and the people, the families buried there, they came to this town with not much in the way of resources and worked hard and became very successful. The characters you're going to see out of the cemetery by their graves are the following. Matthew Kell was the first mayor of Centralia. He was also one of those people who was there probably the day they laid the tracks. His family was from very influential in the Cal, Illinois area. Then we have Forrest Richard Ord. He was the first fire chief. If you'll notice, the hook and ladder drawn by horse-drawn fire trucks. And they took care of all these wooden buildings all over town. Here's an early picture of Centralia, dirt streets. And this particular colorized version is also an early fire truck outside the old city hall, which burned in 1939, taking all the original cemetery records with it. The Centralia area had a pretty big role to play in the American Civil War, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. We talked about all the soldiers, but we kind of think they were all men. There's a woman that joined the Army to be a nurse, a battlefield nurse. Her name was Lavinia Wright. This was a time when nursing was just starting to gain respectability. This was the time of Claire Barton. She's buried, our character Lavinia is buried at Elmwood. Then we have the story of Robert Jimden, who is probably the most poignant of any of the stories. Born in England, came to fight for the Union against slavery, and this letter from his commanding officer sent to the mayor of Centralia recognizes the fact that he had no living relatives, and therefore he asked that this hero be given the honor he deserved. And he was, to all accounts. The funeral was attended by hundreds, and he is buried in the Civil War area. Then we have our first mayor, Robert Roll. No, he's not the first one, he was later, but Robert Roll was a mayor and an entrepreneur. This story repeats itself so many times of people who came and provided incomes for many people by their endeavors. Carrie Pittenger Brown is the daughter of George Pittenger, and she will tell her story about being a young woman during this period. After a certain amount of education, young ladies were not expected to do much of anything, and so the high society of Centralia would join together for various clubs, and this was the Fancy Work Club. Fancy work would be in knitting, crocheting, doilies, embroidery, to have items for their hope chest, because these young women, their goal was to marry and have a family. And the picture there shows them getting ready to go on an excursion. So that was Centralia High Society in that day. George Pittenger, of course, was a man of great wealth, civic-mindedness, so he built the Centralia Opera House, Pittenger Opera House. Here we have a picture of the downtown, beginning of the 20th century. They were talking about paving the roads. Several of those buildings have the name picture on them. One of our characters was Mrs. Ernest or Georgia Mans. This was the day of mom and pop grocery stores. There were no supermarkets. In this general area, the records show there were about 70 of these small groceries. The husband would often be the meat cutter. He could order what he wanted. The wife would run checkout, and there weren't that many brands of food anyway, so you could walk to each store, and there would be 70 of them perhaps in our area, so that everyone could just walk to the local store. We have a number of floral plantings. We have a butterfly garden. Sometime if you visit Elmwood, please drive around and see them. Our garden club maintains those. So we want to thank everyone who was able to attend on this weekend and all the weekends. Like I said, it's our 7th year. We want to thank some people who gave us a lot of help and start along the way. Thanks. That's Elmwood. Bye.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Bell. I was born in 1925 in Jefferson County. My father Thomas had a farm down there, and I had 6 brothers and 4 sisters. And with that large a family, with his farm, he had built-in labor, so we worked the farm. Whenever I was 25 years old, where there was a little accident and I hurt my leg very badly, I couldn't work farm anymore. So my father decided he would build a mercantile store in Walnut Hill, and it was very good. It was busy. It was good, and I worked in it. And while I was working there, I met my wife, Esther Andrews. We married. We had 11 children. 9 of them survived childbirth. 2 of them passed away. I enjoyed the store so much. The first summer, I was going to go up to the town of Centralia, Illinois, and work there. Open up store. People thought I was crazy. They thought I lost my sanity. But I borrowed $200 from my father-in-law, Mr. Andrews, moved to Centralia with Esther, and we opened up a store on the corner of First and Locust. First. I think you call it Broadway now. And we were very successful. The only thing about having a store is that you have to supply that store. And we had to go to St. Louis, Missouri to get supplies. And that was quite a feat. I'd hitch up the team, go over there. It was a 3-day round trip. Now this time of the year, but in the wintertime, it was very cold, and I was there for that. In 1559, the town of Centralia was incorporated into the city of Centralia. We didn't know what development in Kent City, so some of us got together, the business team got together, and we decided to elect a mayor. Someone to run the city. And I was elected the first mayor of Centralia. Now, we didn't know how often to have elections, so we had them every year. We got new people in to fill different jobs. But I was also elected the second mayor of Centralia. And I must have done a good job because I was also elected the third mayor of Centralia. And then I told him that someone else had to take the job. I had other things to do. I was serving on a lot of different boards and committees. The Oddfellows came up here from Walnut Hill and built a brand new building down on Broadway. But in 1870, they elected me again. And in 1874, they elected me again. And I said, that's the last time. I was the president of the American Bible Society. I was the charter member on the board of directors of the Old National Bank. South of town, they discovered a coal, so we dug a coal mine down there. In 1879, I was elected the president of the Centralia Mining and Manufacturing Company. And we did pretty good. I was an alderman, besides being mayor. I was on many boards. I was on many committees. I was the superintendent of schools for 25 years. And then in 1885, in January, I took sick and I died. And I was buried here with my family. And I thank you for coming. Now you know something about the very first mayor of Centralia, Illinois. Have a good evening.
Hello, I'm Robert Roll. And that's Roll with an R, not Cole, not K. So don't confuse me with Ferdinand Cole and his boys. Their boys were something else, I'll tell you. But anyhow, my wife and I were married in 1881. Her name was Anna Stabler. And we married in Marquette, Michigan. And we had 4 kids. Caroline, who she loved to call herself Callie, because that means beautiful in Greek. We had the next daughter was Anna, named after my wife, and then Teresa, which is a family name, and then finally we got our son, Bobby. He was Robert Jr., but didn't want to be called Junior, so we called him Bobby. But like normal, I'm always just kind of ahead of my story here. I was born in Marquette, Michigan, January 14th, 1856, to German immigrants. My dad lived to be 82. My grandfather, his father, lived to be 96, so hopefully I've had a nice long life. But for jobs, basically as a teenager, I went out, started doing anything I could do. I moved to Minnesota because I wanted to travel, and for 5 years I was a farmhand in Minnesota, but I got tired of that, and I came back to Marquette to work in the powder mills. Now the powder mills can be dangerous because what we did, we made black powder. But it certainly paid well, and I was there for almost a year, and I'd saved up enough money to do what I wanted to do, and that was to buy a beer bottling company, which I did that same year that Ann and I were married in 1881. And for 5 years we stayed there in Michigan. But then the opportunity of a lifetime came along. I heard that there was a soda water factory available in Centralia, Illinois, the only one of its kind, and at Centralia. It was located just 60 miles from St. Louis. And I knew St. Louis was growing, and I knew Centralia because of the railroad, it was growing too. So we sold our business in Michigan and moved down here to Centralia. Everybody with open arms just took us in. We started, besides just opening the business of Centralia Bottling Works, we started joining clubs, organizations, and everything else to be part of the community. And somebody convinced me after a few years we were here to run for city alderman, which I was city alderman in 80, 81, 83. And then we took a lot of time off because I had this busy business going on. But then they convinced me to run for mayor. So I was mayor in 1901 and 1902 in Centralia. But that's not all I did. I obviously was president of the Illinois Bottlers Association by that time. And it's getting close to 1904, and in 1904, you know what that was? It was a big fair in St. Louis, but it was something else too. It was a presidential election. And old TR, Teddy Roosevelt, and I got along real good, and I helped to get him elected. But politics really wasn't my passion. My big passion was sports. In 1900, we started the White Sox team in Centralia, Illinois. Grew and grew and grew through the years, and by 1908 we played somebody called the St. Louis Cardinals and beat them. We almost beat the St. Louis Browns, but they won in extra innings. But anyhow, back to my work. The bottling works flourished, kept growing. Obviously getting close to 1920, and 1920 brought in Prohibition, so all my bottling stuff took off. I had a lot of different flavors of bottles, of works. Lemon sour, strawberry, cream, sarsaparilla, pineapple, iron brew, and one of my favorites, chocolate. Cherry phosphate, orange, royal ginger ale, champagne cider, raspberry cream, Coca-Cola, heard of that one probably, celery cola, Lithia water, siphon seltzer, and we also had bottled beer from Himes and Pabst Blue Ribbon. Of course, then got late in the 20s. Actually in 20, Bobby opened up another bottling company called Whistle. Whistle Bottling in Centralia, Illinois. And the years went by, and in 1929, in fact in February 1929, we sold our business to Midwest Dairy. 2 months later, Bobby took a big position in St. Louis for the St. Louis Whistle Company, and he had him a great big office. And me, what did I do? I retired and started watching more ball games. Thank you. Oh, if you ever want to see me again, want to talk to me, just whistle.
Good evening. Thank you for stopping by. My name is Lavinia Wright. My maiden name was Slaymaker. I lived right here in Centralia at 702 East Broadway. I lived there with my husband Newton, or my husband Ed, rather, and my son's name was Newton. My home was my Eden and my joy, and I was well known for greeting friend and stranger alike with a warm hand clasp, cheerful hospitality, and a kind word, even in the days of my own suffering. My parents emigrated from Germany to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was born there in 1826. I was one of 12 children. There were 6 boys and 6 girls. My family is listed as one of the pioneer families of Centralia. I am also a proud member of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Army, as well as a charter member of the Women's Relief Corps. I was commissioned as a nurse in the Civil War. I was commissioned by the great Dorothy Dix, known for her patriotism and for her reform in asylums and prisons. Now, Dorothy Dix held to the forward-thinking notion, which was quite revolutionary at the time, that patients would heal better if they were clean, had clean beds and bandages, and were well fed. This was not the common thinking at the time. She was to provide care to the wounded in hospitals, wayside camps, and tents. Now, the restrictions for being commissioned as a nurse in 1861 were very strict and very specific. One had to be very plain, preferably middle-aged. One could have no pearls in their hair, no ribbons, no bows, no hoop skirts, and no jewelry. Now, this caused a stir amongst the younger women because it's the young who are always most anxious to serve. But once the fighting took over, a lot of the standards went by the wayside, including the uniforms, as the clothing that we wore was pretty much left in shambles by the conditions. Thousands of women came to serve as nurses for both the North and the South during the Civil War. They came from all walks of life and all classes. They came to visit their brothers and husbands and sons when they were wounded and simply stayed without any clear commission or duties. They came from convents. They came from aid societies. They were the officers' wives and daughters, came to draw rations and simply stayed. These women just simply showed up. These gentle women would run to the battlefront in the heat of fighting to tend to our wounded. But soon the scope of the war overran the facilities, and all gender-related restrictions fell to the wayside because initially we were simply to aid and assist the men who were actually providing the patient care. We would pat their arms and hold their hands and give comfort and help them write letters home. But once the facilities became overburdened, all of the gender restrictions quickly fell aside. And it was the women who stepped forward, who took charge to rectify this situation and take care of everything. They would stop at nothing to provide care to our soldiers, to our wounded. They would beg, they would steal, they would spend their wages on supplies, they would have supplies sent from home. They would raid the government rations, often without permission, but they always got away with it. We need to be recognized not as mere observers or helpers, but as full participants of this war. This was the first time that women had worked alongside men in a male military environment in a responsible role. This was the first time society recognized nursing as a legitimate profession. After the war, This led to reforms in both nursing education and nursing science, and I am most proud to have been a part of that. I passed away in 1908. I was 82 years old, and I'll just say one more thing about that war. I have never worked so hard in my life, and I would have rather done that than anything else in the world. I thank you, and the next time you see a nurse, think of me and how it all began, and I thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Faye Pittenger. I was born on August 8, 1873 here in Centralia. I was the only daughter of George and Lizzie Pittenger. I had a brother and his name was George. We lived at 408 East Broadway. We had a beautiful brick home on the corner of Broadway and Elm Street. My father was so loved and respected in this community. He was a soldier in the Civil War. He was an officer in the Spanish-American War, and he was a prominent businessman. He had many different businesses. He also was invested in the coal mines. You could say he was a very influential man. Many people sought his advice on many matters and issues of the day. I enjoyed growing up in Centralia. I was in a young ladies group that you might have heard of. It was called the Fancy Work Club. Our first meeting was December 7th, 1893. 16 young ladies answered the call to become members. Hence, 16 pieces of fancy work were begun. Now, we decided that we would gift all of our first projects to the first out of the group that was going to be married. Now, there's been much speculation on who will be the first. It's one of our favorite topics of conversation as we work. We do crocheting of doilies, and then we also do fancy trim for bed linens and table linens and tea towels, hand towels, and fancy trim for clothes. We do embroidery, and we also, some of the ladies have learned tatting to make lace. Now, my favorite is embroidery. At the meetings, we learn new stitches and new patterns. Now, I was not the first from the group to get married, but I did marry my dear beloved John Calvin Brown on August 14th, 1897 in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. I was 24 years old, and we had met when I was traveling to seek treatment for my health. My health has been an ongoing concern. My parents have taken me to doctors in Illinois and in St. Louis. My husband, Jack, is in the lumber business. We lived in Indiana for a while, and then we moved back to Centralia to be near my folks. I have so many ailments. We have continued treatment with the doctors in Illinois and in St. Louis, but they haven't helped. In spring of 1900, my father began construction on the Pittenger Grand Opera House. It is to be the grandest opera house in all of Illinois. We'll have the best performances at the opera house. It's going to be very exciting. But sadly, in October of 1900, before the construction could be completed, the opera house was destroyed by fire. But what happened next was a miracle. The community came together to rebuild the Pittenger Grand Opera House. Carpenters donated a week's work. Railroaders and coal miners donated a day's wage. The people of the community came together with their time, their money, and their talent to rebuild the Opera House. Now, at this time, I discovered I was with child. The construction on the Opera House was to be completed in March of 1901. But sadly, I died before the construction was completed. I died when I was 27 years old. I died in childbirth on February 7th, 1901. I had a baby girl. We had chosen the name Faith Pinninger Brown. On opening night, my father roped off a front row seat in honor of my memory. He did this just for me. I wish I could have been there. Well, thank you for stopping by and seeing me. Good night, and please remember that every day is a gift. Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Forrest Richard Ord. I was born on July 22nd, 1861. I led a fairly normal life as a child. Me and my brother, roughhousing, running around, playing in the dirt, climbing trees, pushing each other out of those trees. As a teenager, I was bored. I wanted a job. So I decided to become a wagon driver. It gave me a little extra money on the side. It was nice. When I was 24, I met my beautiful wife, Ella Rue, and we were married April 5th, 1885. She'd kill me if I forgot that date. We had 5 beautiful children together: Cyrus, William, James and Charles, and our one daughter, Willinette. Willinette was my favorite. Don't tell the other boys that. She always used to tell me, "Dad, I don't like my name. It doesn't sound like a girl's name." And I would always tell her, "Well, I could have named you Forrest." She didn't like that much either. Providing for my family as a wagon driver was enough. It put food on the table. But I wanted to do something more. I wanted to do something for my community. So I decided to join the Centralia Fire Department and become an engineer. I would drive the wagon. In 1910 is when I joined, and up until this point they were an all-volunteer department. They were established in 1859. And in 1920, 10 years into my career, they became a full-time paid department with 4 men, 3 others, and myself. Of course, firefighting was different back then. You had horses and wagons and buckets. Lots and lots of buckets. A fun story about horses is we would sleep on the 2nd floor of our firehouse in the bunks. And did you know horses can climb stairs? So imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a horse right here. It's frightening to say the least. So we decided to go with spiral staircases. Horses can climb spiral staircases. So again, imagine waking up in the middle of the night with a horse right here. So then came the invention of the fire pole. And thank God horses can't climb fire poles. You know, sometimes I sit out here in Elmwood and I hear the sounds of the trucks, the sirens. I see the flashing lights, and I wish we had that back in my day. Nobody really moved out of the way of the horses. I also wish I was around in 1954 for the establishment of a new department, the Centralia Fire Protection District, and their first chief, Friday Condor. He was a friend of mine, and I wish I could have seen him take over. Still to this day, Centralia Fire Protection District is still going, as is the Centralia Fire Department. And when I sit out here and I hear those sirens and I see those lights, it makes me feel proud. Proud that those men are saving our community, protecting our community. It makes me proud that I was able to serve our community. And it makes me proud that I am buried here in Centralia in Elmwood Cemetery. So if you ever want to chat, come on out and see me. I'll be here for a while. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome to my humble abode. My name is Georgia Joyce Taylor Manns. I was born on a Saturday, February 4th, February 6th, 1904, in Tunnel Hill, Illinois. My parents were Henry and Nora Taylor of Tunnel Hill area. I was actually the 4th child born, and this first child was Clarice, my sister. Unfortunately, I didn't get to know her. She died in infancy. Then there were the twin sisters, Iva and Viva, followed by me, followed by my brother, Lenny, followed by sister Leslie, who also died in infancy. We were sorry to see her leave. Finally, the twin brothers, Herschel and Herbert, were born. Oh, they were characters. The funny thing is, my mama's family had 3 sets of twins. And then she had 2 sets. And you know, my daughter Nancy has 1 set of twins. It'll be interesting to see in the future who has more. Well, I'll tell you what, living in Tunnel Hill was a great time. We lived next to a logging firm, but after I was 2 years old, the logging firm went down in a huge fire, and it took our home with it. My mama tried to run in to save her wedding band that was there. The firemen had to stop her. Oh, I remember she cried and cried. It was sad. After that, we moved here to Centralia, Illinois, and my dad took on a job as the railroad. It was a wonderful time growing up here. In my later years, I met a man who would become my future husband, Ernest Virgil Manns. That's M-A-N-N-S. They were from Prussia originally and came to this area in 1804. Now, Ernie and I, we got along so well at the picnic that we got together often and had a great time. And in October 1922, we eloped. It was so romantic. Until our parents found out, and they were not very happy about it, but they got over it. You know, coming from big families on both sides of our families, we decided to have a big family too. And I did. I gave birth to 10 children, 5 boys, 5 girls. There was Doris, and then William, followed by, who was that? Doris, William. Oh yes, Betty, then Dean, then Donnie. But Donnie didn't make it long. He died at 41 of cancer. Then there was Shirley and Clifford, Nancy, Judy, and baby boy Jimmy. Never a dull moment at a home with a lot of kids in it. Well, I'll tell you what, Ernie and his father had a great time learning the butcher business. And they also built things. In fact, if you go to 423 North Johnson, you can see the beautiful home that Ernie and his father William built. It still stands today. We actually lived there for a short while. But as our family grew, we needed a bigger home. Well, I can tell you one day, we had decided we needed a bigger home. We were living on Locust Street, and there was this place just across the street, down 3 houses. You know, I'm pretty sure I told every one of these kids we were moving. So when they came home from school, they should come down to the new place. Well, somewhere along the line, Bill wasn't paying attention. And he ran home, and he opened the door and said, "Mom, I'm home." But his mom was not there. There were other people that had moved in already. Oh my goodness, he was so upset. He went out on the porch and cried because he couldn't remember where we moved to. And we're all down at the new house, and we're just laughing our fool heads off because we were standing there watching him cry. I had to stop it though and send someone down to get him and bring him home. Oh, the good times. Well, I tell you, Ernie provided very well for us. But in 1930, his father, William, decided to move the rest of the family to Oregon. Now, to provide for us, he gave Ernie 3 grocery stores. Now, grocery store is a bit of a misnomer because they were mom and pop businesses at that time that were meat markets and grocers. So we did fairly well, but in 1933 with the Depression, those 3 stores did not succeed. Ernie, though, had become such a good butcher that he started working for a place called the Palace Meat Market. Now, the Palace Meat Market was very well known. It had been run by the Alcorns, who passed it on to others, and it was located just across the street from the Illinois Theater. Right behind it was this big brick poultry house with a big brick smokestack. Ernie plucked many a chicken in that house. But I'll tell you what, 1932, businesses started getting on to the idea that it wasn't fun to come pick up the meat and run somewhere else to get something else. So they started the whole grocery store with having things in cans or other things that would go with your meat for dinner. It was much easier to get them than to send a cart, two-wheeled horse cart, and to store to pick up something. Did you know meat back then only cost 15 to 35 cents a pound? Well, in 1957, Ernie and I, and a buddy of his named Bill Cooter, bought the Palace Meat Market. And we ran it for the next 10 years. Bill only lasted 5 years, so we actually did it for the full 10. But as times changed, we had to do the inevitable. The mom and pop markets started failing. The big grocery stores started coming up. So October 1968, we closed the Palace Meat Market. Bellamy Decorating Company moved in. Our lives were filled with many things here in this valley. But sadly, December 22nd, 1972, Ernie passed away. I myself made it until March 6th, 2001, 1 month after my 97th birthday. What a glorious life. I suffered through 3 bouts of cancer, but I made it. I hope that you will enjoy your life, and I thank you for visiting with me this evening. God bless.
Hello everyone, how are you this fine evening? My name is Robert Jehu, and I'm buried right here in this cemetery. I'm a bit of an oddity for this cemetery, for I wasn't born here in Centralia. I was actually born back in jolly old England in 1840. I had a fairly normal childhood, going to school in England and helping my parents with their business whenever I could, and helping around the house with the chores and whatnot. But whenever I turned 18, I decided it was time for me to start my own business, and I moved to the Greater London area in 1858 to try my way. However, if you know anything about London in the mid-19th century, you know that it was overcrowded and smelly. As a matter of fact, there was something called the Great Stink of 1858 in July of that year, when Parliament could not leave their houses to go to the Parliament building without vomiting in the streets from the stench. But after a few years of living in England, I decided I didn't like the smell, and I needed some fresh air and set sail for America. I arrived here in 1860 and found my way to Centralia in early 1861, where I was welcomed with open arms, much more than I ever was whenever I grew up in my home country. I fell in love with this town, the people, and the opportunity that it gave. Though how was I supposed to know that 4 months later, after I arrived, the American Civil War would break out? Being from England, we abolished slavery in 1833, so I'd never grown up in a world where a man could own another man. So to me, the southern cause of slavery was nothing short of barbaric. So I enlisted in Major McKee's Marion County 11th Infantry Unit in August of 1861. And after my first 3 months enlistment, I signed on for another 3 years, for I wasn't going to have this war be won without me fighting in it. We fought the Southerners all across this nation, and the Copperheads. Damn Copperheads. Cowards is what I call them. Copperheads, for those that don't know, were Union citizens who benefited from living in the Union, yet sympathized with the Southern cause and tried to undermine the Union's efforts to bring them back into the nation whenever they could. To me, they have the patriotism of Benedict Arnold and men with whom Judas Iscariot would be considered a philanthropist of purest intent. Anyway, we fought them all across this nation, and I eventually found myself fighting south of the Mason-Dixon line in the Battle of Vicksburg, Mississippi. The battle went on for weeks with neither side gaining any ground. But one thing that had happened was our tunnels that we had used to transport our troops secretly had been discovered by the Southerners. So we no longer could use them for that purpose, so General McKee suggested that we use them for another purpose: weapons. We packed one of our tunnels full of dynamite directly below one of the main southern supply routes, and when they went over the dynamite, we blew them to smithereens. As a matter of fact, there was one black Confederate soldier I remember flying through the air and landing just 10 feet away from where we were. We picked him up and asked him how far he flew, and he said he must have flown about 300 yards. My friend Jacob then turned to me and said if he flew that far, he must have saw his master. Anyway, eventually we left Vicksburg and made our way north to Yazoo City, Mississippi, where we were able to defeat the Confederates and take the city in less than 2 days. However, then the Southern cavalry arrived and blockaded us in. It was just me, my infantry, and General McKee. Our supplies were running low after a few weeks, and we were starting to lose morale. When in the 11th hour, the 8th Louisiana Cavalry Division appeared over the hill and broke through the Southern blockade. They rendezvoused with us in the center of the city, and we were able to plan a counteroffensive and drive the Southerners away. I remember looking out the hill and seeing the Southerners running away. I turned to my general and said, "Look, they are running! They are running away! They are..." When I was shot in the head and killed. A bit anticlimactic, I will admit. But what a cause to die for. Freedom. True freedom. Freedom that only those in a democracy can truly understand. My body was sent back here to Centralia at General McKee's request, and he penned a very touching letter describing my heroism and patriotism that was published in the Sentinel. It must have struck a chord with the city of Centralia, for my funeral was the highest attended event that the First Presbyterian Church had ever had at that time. I guess many people of Centralia wanted to come by and pay their respects to the British Union soldier. I will leave you with this. I came to your city a foreigner, but was not treated as one. I was treated as a member of this community, for I wasn't seen as a foreigner, but as an immigrant, for that is what this nation is. A nation built by immigrants, maintained by immigrants, and will forever be maintained by immigrants. Thank you all for coming, and good night.